Hello world and welcome to a new tutorial. Some of you may have seen this little jellyfish postcard I made a few weeks ago on my Instagram, and I'm here today to show you guys how to make it. So let's dive in by talking about materials. Since I'm making a postcard, I started with a few pieces of fabric a bit larger than 4 by 6. Feel free to start with any base size of fabric that you like. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I also had a number of scraps of fabric with fused web on the back. These were left over from my recent rainbow flutterstorm quilt I made. Check out my Instagram for that one. But if you don't already have web-backed scraps, go ahead and grab a few scraps of fabric and fuse the web to the back of the fabric to your manufacturer's instructions. If you're not sure what fusible web is, example products are Heat and Bond, Pellon Wonder Under, or Steam a Seam. I recommend the light or feather light versions of these products, but feel free to use the heavy. Just be aware that it may gum up your needle when we stitch these later. Other than that, you'll need an iron, ironing surface, and scissors. If you're paranoid like me, I have a pair of scissors set aside for fabric adjacent cutting, which is mostly batting and fused fabric, but your regular fabric scissors will probably work just as well. It's been honestly almost a decade using these scissors without sharpening, and they're still sharp enough to cut fabric, so I'm probably a bit too paranoid. To make these jellyfish, there are two main pieces that need to be cut, the head and the tentacles. All of this is super freehand. For the tentacles, I cut them as a wobbly, curvy, tapering-like shape. Remember to vary the curve, wobble, and length as you're cutting these. If every tentacle is the same shape, curve, and length, it'll become difficult to layer them later and achieve that undulating motion look. I used about 10 to 12 tentacles per jellyfish. Once all your tentacles are cut, start layering them on the base fabric. To get the jellyfish shape, you'll want to arrange them so they all come together at one end where the head is going to be, and make sure the other end flares out in a cone-like shape. It helps to cut the head shape of the jellyfish before placing the tentacles though, so not the order that I started in here. The head is cut from generally a triangle shape by curving the corners. Figure out the general placement of where you want the head to be and focus on layering the tentacles originating from the base of where the head will be. I generally start with my darker fabrics as the bottom layer. Just leveraging darker value means that things are generally further away, and lighter value means that they're closer. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it helps to emphasize some dimension in the finished piece. Layering the tentacles over each other also helps create some of that dimensionality and movement, so don't be afraid to overlap the tentacles. If you have trouble getting papers off the back of the web, it helps to score the paper back firmly with a pin, and the paper will peel away around the score mark. To help set your work, stop every few tentacles and fuse everything down according to your manufacturer's instructions. You may also want to periodically check that the top of the tentacle pile is in the right width for the size of the jellyfish head. Too narrow and it's going to look a little bit unbalanced, but too wide and it's not going to be covered by the head. Just double check that periodically. Once you've placed everything to your satisfaction, peel the paper off the back of the head and fuse it in place. I cut a ton of tentacles, so I actually made several more postcards cutting things in the right order for these ones. I'll montage through the creation of these other jellyfish really quick to show you a few other examples of the process. But if you want to skip ahead to the quilting step, I'll leave a link to that in the description below. So next up is quilting. I laid each of them on a piece of batting and roughly trimmed the batting to slightly larger than the jellies. Since these were so small, I didn't really use any basting to hold the fabric to the batting. Often friction alone is enough to hold these in place just by pressing firmly against the batting. Neither did I use a walking foot to quilt them. Mine is officially broken now, and new ones are heckin' expensive for my machine, so I've been making do without one for about a year now. It's worked alright. To quilt these, I start by dropping the needle at the center top of the head and stitching curved lines down and up the head, kind of trying to emulate the sort of vein-like lines in real jellyfish. The curve of the outermost lines echoes the outer edge of the head, and as the lines get closer to the middle, they get straighter. Once you pass the middle, just remember the curve needs to go in the other direction. Once I get the last of these lines stitched, I stitch around the outside of the head until I reach the tentacles at the bottom of the head. Now I begin by adding the quilted tentacles. I start by quilting a wobbly line down the jellyfish and echoing that line back up to create a similar wobbly, tapered shape like we were cutting in the beginning. I'm not echoing the fabric tentacles that we've fused down. Rather, I am covering the area with new tentacles that are made with quilting. The goal of this quilting is to try to cross each tentacle at least twice, once in the upper half and once in the lower half. It doesn't have to be perfect coverage, just enough to add extra reinforcement to the fusible web. It is perfectly okay for these tentacles to overlap too. Once I've returned to the top, I stitch along the base of the head to where I want the next tentacle to begin and start another tentacle. Once the last tentacle is completed, finish by stitching the rest of the way around the edge of the head and ending at the start. Backstitch to secure, clip your threads, and we're on to the next step. As in the beginning, I made several of these, so up next is a montage of what this process looks like on a couple other examples. If you want to skip ahead to turning these into postcards, there will be another link in the description below. To turn these into postcards, I followed the general tutorial by Sarah Ruiz. I'll leave a link below to her blog post of the process in more detail, but if you want a visual, you can stick around. It starts by trimming these quilted sandwiches to 4 inches by 6 inches. The edge stitching is going to eat into the finished card by about 3/16 of an inch, so I'm trying to keep my jellyfish at least a 1/4 inch away from the edge. I stabilize these postcards by securing the quilt sandwich to a piece of Peltex 71F, which is a very stiff, almost like cardboard stiff stabilizer, and it has fusible adhesive on one side. Important note, if you're using the single-sided fusible stabilizer like I am, the fusible side goes away from the batting. We're going to use it to fuse paper in place later, so you want the smooth side against the batting. I'm using this instead of the double-sided fusible because I was given 10 yards of it, and hey, waste not. If you're using the double-sided, you can skip this step and just fuse everything together. To get around the fact that I'm not fusing my sandwich to the stabilizer, I stitched the two together using a very narrow seam allowance. This will be covered with the edge stitching, so I'm not worried about it showing. Because of my no longer working walking foot, I find it easiest to stitch these together with the fabric side down and the stabilizer side up. Remember, adhesive side is exposed, smooth side is against the batting. After the stabilizer and sandwich are stitched together, I fuse a postcard-sized piece of paper to the adhesive side of the stabilizer with my iron. Keep your iron temps low for this so the paper isn't scorched. Finish the postcard with a zigzag stitch overcasting the edges. I started using an overcasting foot in the beginning when I started making postcards, but to be entirely honest, the stabilizer is stiff enough that just a regular foot is good enough. Once you reach the edge where you started, stitch over it to give some overlap, backstitch if you so desire, clip your threads, and with that, the postcard's done. So I may have gone a little bit overboard making postcards lately, and by a little, I mean a lot. There's just something super satisfying about being able to start and finish a project in less than 30 minutes. So if you're interested in owning one of these postcards that I made here in this tutorial, head on over to my shop linked in the description below where you can find these as well as other fabric postcards. Thank you for joining me today for this tutorial. I'm not sure when I'll get around to making another one, but you can stay in the know by subscribing. You can also follow me on Instagram where I post relatively regularly. So that's it for now. Catch you later.